Um, Welcome, everybody. So we're happy to have you. Welcome to the session, Breakout 2. I hope everyone online can also hear as well. So we're going to talk about research software policies. In this session, we have the policies in research organization for research software. This is our RDA working group. Please go to the meeting notes if you can. So there we are, having a little section for questions, notes, and also you can fill your name so that we have a record of participation and all. So before we get started, we want to acknowledge the country, we acknowledge and celebrate the Free Australians, and we pay our respect to their elders, past and present. Very important. So let me give you a quick overview of the agenda. What are we expecting for the next 1.5 hours, right? Quick introduction of what's the working group about, give you a little bit of context of what are we gonna discuss. Quick presentation where a couple of us are going to mix and talk. The different topics, institutional software, research software policies, resources that we have collected and that we have published, case studies on research software policies, and a sneak peek to the summary report as well. This is what you can expect in the next 30 minutes. We're having a discussion, so with the classical Menti questions, so that people also online and here, we have done this a couple of times already in the past, and we see that this working group is a very dynamic working group, where we basically work with a lot of community feedback and community participation. So the PRO4RS working group stands again for research software policies of research software for research, policies in research organizations for research software. Nice acronym. It is a co-convened working group from the RDA, but also the Research Software Alliance. This working group is supported through the RDA Tiger program by the Netherlands Sea Science Center, and more recently, also the RDA Cascading Grant. Let me show you the timeline. So it's been, a little bit more than 2 years. We can say that, time flies, really. So we started as a ReSA task force, established in early 23, where we had the first iteration of the first overview of research software policies. Then we got together people interested on the topic. We identified some gaps, and there were quite some good synergy across communities. And we submitted a case statement for the RDA. We not only got endorsed, but also we obtained the RDA Tiger Facilitation Support Call. We had our first Best of Feder and community consultation in the RDA Plenary 21 in Salzburg. We also reached community feedback in the RDA Plenary 23 in Costa Rica. The last year we've been working on the reports and a little bit of the hands-on part of the working group. And most recently, we also got awarded the RDA Tiger Cascading Grant that allowed us to continue the good work, actually. So a little bit of using the opportunity of the momentum, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of how the work looks like. So the objectives of the working group are quite straightforward, to be honest, and those link to the deliverables that we set up at the beginning. The idea is to identify existing policies on research software across the world, again, from research performing organizations, universities, scientific institutes, and so on. The second objective was to collate resources on supporting policy change, because what we can understand is as well that in order to support institutions on the governance of research software, we've seen that also requires cultural change, cultural awareness, and, well, basically changing the way of working and looking at things. The third objective had to do with the actual content analysis of the policies, because we want to see how the currently research performing organizations look at research software. Is it an asset? Is it an invention? Is it a valuable output? How do they look at it? How do they govern it? What is the language that they use in the policies? Is it a scientific asset, etc.? Finally, we also want to highlight the importance of case studies. So we conducted a couple of those on which universities have implemented research software policies. What we did in order to, come up with the deliverables of the working group was dividing the work on 2 working groups, basically. The first sub-working group had to do with the identification of research software policies. As I mentioned before, we basically searched for policy documents, sometimes in the institution or university website, but what was important was to look for publicly available policy documents. So far we have 81 policies worldwide that are identified. If you go to the working group page of the RDA, I guess we will be able to see the 38 that we need to just update with the rest. But as you can see, it's an inventory of those policy documents where you get to have the organization, the policy resource, the country where the organization that comes from, and some general notes of those policies. So if you in your institute are working on a policy that will govern or support research software, this is a must for you. But also, perhaps in your institution, you have already some sort of a research software policy, and maybe you want to look for a reform in the policy. This is also a good place to start. Michelle? I guess,
Thanks, Pedro. I'm Michelle Barker from the Research Software Alliance, another one of the 8 co-chairs of this working group. There'll be a couple of others joining to talk as we go through as well. So our second sub-working group was looking at resources that support policy change. So it's fantastic that we have this database of examples of universities that have in place policies that support research software in different ways. But that's not really enough to get change. Actually, you need some ideas on how to influence key people, whether training is needed, whether you have appropriate infrastructure, whether there's a supportive community, etc. So to fill in some of that broader information that would help people wanting to affect change in their organisations, we did some crowdsourcing of resources that do this. So this second report shares our findings, and there's a range of resources included in it, so with different approaches to change. So there's some that are really kind of general sociological advice, because I'm a sociologist originally, on how do you get change in a system? You know, what do you have to do? Through to some very specific documents where people have written about how they got change around open science or around research data management in their organisation or discipline that give quite specific advice. So there's a range of resources so that you can find one, a model that might best work for you and your situation. There's some common threads across all the resources, though, that you need to identify some kind of key success factor to be able to market it internally. It might be a business case, for example. You need to identify who in your community, your research institution, are the key people, and that can be really varied. It might be your open source program office. It might be your director of e-research. It might be your head librarian. It might be your vice president of open science. And it might be all of those that you also have to influence, as well as the HR director. And then there's some general advice to aim for policy about what good policy design looks like around setting out expectations, rather behaviours that will be rewarded, using the carrot rather than the stick approach. And ensuring that policy doesn't just say, yay, we support research software and open source software, but actually has some kind of implementation associated with it, so it goes through other shifts related to procedural and behavioural changes. Because without a broad stakeholder buy-in, positive change just won't happen. And now I'll pass back to Pedro, yes?
Yeah, so the next step was to actually look at the actual policy documents, the actual policy content. So, and then we did categorization, annotation, and curation of all those policies. What we did is that we defined a set of questions for each one of those policies. We literally had to study every aspect of the policy document of each institution. And then those questions, those set of questions are mapped into categories, right? So categories, there were 15 categories that actually didn't just come out of the blue. In one of the community consultations in the RDA plenary 23, we asked for community feedback, and then we ended up having kind of the priority categories that should be mentioned in a research software policy. So, for instance, research infrastructure should be mentioned because that supports software created in scientific context. Open source, are there any clauses? Are there any paragraphs about open source and how is that managed? Intellectual property, the fair principles alignment, especially with the other parallel working groups like FAIR for research software and so on. And then we did the categorization with 38 policies, on which we have, for instance, here the top 5, I would say, top 5 in the sense of categories covered, right? So we have, for instance, Department of Energy, Office of Scientific and Technical Information in the US. The second place, we have the Helmholtz Center in Germany. The University of Stuttgart as well, the Max Planck Institute of Meteorology in Germany, and also Technical University Delft in the Netherlands. So those policies, if you read through them, you could see that the majority of the categories that we identified are mentioned, but also not necessarily like as in the text, but they are covered, right? So FAIR principles is not just mentioned as FAIR principles, but more like FAIR principles in the context of research software. So let me give you an example. This is the Astron open source policy. Astron is the Netherlands Institute for Radio Astronomy. And this is kind of the preface or the principles of the policy document. And in the policy, there is a wide variety in policy documents, right? Sometimes it's a 1 page, sometimes it's 20 pages, sometimes it's in the university website, sometimes it's a downloadable PDF document. And then you start to ask the category questions, right? Like the topics. So you ask the following: how is intellectual property addressed here? Right? How is in this institution intellectual property of research software governed? You can see that the policy states the following: if a software product is developed by Astron in collaboration with external parties, an agreement shall be signed that defines software product ownership and contains the choice of source code license for that collaboration, right? So very clear is the second statute of the principles, and also mentions that by default, Astron is the owner of the code that is written by its employers for which Astron resources are used. So within the context of employment, research software generated at the Astron Institute is owned by Astron. Deviations are possible, but should be clearly documented. We can also ask the following: how does the policy align to the FAIR principles? We see the fifth statute in the principles that for each substantial Astron software product, a DOI should be generated or a scientific paper that describes the software product is recommended. Right? So we did this mapping each of the 15 categories instead of with a combination of content analysis throughout 38 policy documents. So this graph, it's like the flip side of the top 5 that I showed you, where in the top 5 we have a list of institutes and how many times each of those categories are mentioned. This one is the flipped side, where that asks how many institutions cover one of those categories, right? So out of the 38, 27 institutions cover or mention research software as research outcome, but also 27 of those policies have a clause or an amendment on copyrights and software licensing, and so on, right? The not so much mentioned topics are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in research. So people do not necessarily see as a connection or that needs to be mentioned in the research software policy, but also not much about research assessment reform in the context of recognizing and rewarding research software developers or people that develop scientific code. That's also not mentioned in those policies. Or research software impacting education. So what we see mainly are topics and characteristics that had mainly to do with the managing of software beyond the impact of research software and the recognition of their developers. This report is already available in Zenodo, just like the 2 other reports. Please, Katz.
So the next working group that was the working group number 5, which this working group looked at the case studies for research policies. So we were interested in how the policies came to be. So we conducted a series of interviews with the people who were involved in the creation of policies from the different universities, and to try to find out what was the motivation for creating these policies. So the universities that we interviewed were Monash University, Delft University of Technology, Helmholtz Association, and Jülich, which is Helmholtz Center, but it's not. It's part of the Helmholtz Association, but it's one of the centers, and they have different policies. So that was also interesting to see how the association had different policies than the centers. So the interview questions cover different aspects, like the origin of the policy, how was the policy initiated, which in some cases, in the case of TU Delft, it was initiated by the researchers who were frustrated with not being able to do their research or to use the software that they were creating in the research, and they were the ones initiating the policies. And in the case of Jülich, they started from the management layer who said, we don't have a software policy, we need one. Can we create one? So it was really more of a top-down. The interview also covered the question of scope, ownership, licensing of the topics that Pedro was mentioning, which of these topics are covered by the policy. That was also part of the interview questions. We also asked about the policy approval. What was the approval process? What was the process for it to be approved? So in the Delft case, that it was more of a bottom-up, it required a lot of talking to people and convincing people in the higher management layers that this was necessary. In the Jülich case, because it started more from a bottom-up approach, it was already had approval from the management, so it was much easier to get approval for the policy. And another aspect that we covered in the interviews was the effect. Has there been any effect on the research practice at the institution since the policy has been implemented? And of course, that also relates with compliance. How are they measuring that the policy is being followed? And we also ask about what their reflections. So retrospectively, would they do something different if they were to implement the policies again? That was one of the things that I found interesting during the interviews, was that somebody mentioned that they would want to have more tools for enforcing the implementation of the policy, so that it was very, in their view, that it was very soft, and that they would want the policy to have more ways to encourage researchers to implement it. So that was interesting also to hear. So the interviews covered all of these different aspects. So we also summarized all of these interviews with some of the key insights in this report, which is available in Zenodo. One of the things that I found more interesting was that there's no correct way of implementing a policy, so it can be bottom-up or top-down. That works either way, and it depends on the institution. That monitoring needs, so that was it would be better if it had more monitoring or more mechanisms to monitor the effect of the policy, or how much it's being followed. And the people that implement the policy, that's a key part. So depending on the organization, who do you need to get involved to get traction for the policy? That's quite important, and I think that was a commonality for all of the case studies that we interviewed. So yeah, we hope that this report helps others to see how to work as an inspiration, to see how can you implement the research software policy at their own organization, at your organization. Yeah, that's the main take-home messages from this report. And then over to Michelle, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Carlos. There was just one more document that we've released recently as a preprint of an article that we've submitted to the Journal of Research Software, where we wanted to take a little bit further the finding that we'd had when we'd analysed the corpus of software policies or policy supporting software that we had, and found that very few of them tied in with the reform of research assessment reform agenda, or enabling recognition of research software outputs in people's promotion or tenure or appointment processes. There'd been very, very few examples of research software policies or open science policies or research data policies that included that element. So we wanted to we had already identified that as a critical policy gap in one of the earlier reports. So we just wanted to think a little bit more broadly about how this could be addressed by the community going forward. So we started by identifying that there were other broader works of relevance, such as OpenAIR's model policy, which gives recommendations to research performing organisations on establishing reward mechanisms, which includes some examples on open software. That the Opus Researcher Assessment Framework also has ideas about how to include research software. And that the RDA interest group on sharing rewards and credit had also developed a template specifically for fairness evaluation criteria, but that included things around software management plans. So these weren't examples of policies in place in research institutions, but broader advice being given to research institutions on how to address this. So we came up with a model that might be useful in giving advice on how institutions could create policies that did things like supported researcher promotion and appointment based on software citation cases. This is in the preprint, this diagram, that suggests that universities or research labs or research performing organisations could think about 3 different layers. The outer layer, the darkest orange, the biggest semicircle, no, actually, let me start in the middle. The lightest or the more yellow middle layer says that sometimes a research organisation might choose recognition of research software as a scholarly... Sorry, let me rephrase that. That the most important thing that's needed in a multi-layered approach for research policy development is this central element that research software is recognised as an equal with research publications, open data, open hardware, open educational resources as a scholarly output, and that its personnel also need to be supported as well as the actual software. Then there's a second or middle layer that there needs to be alignment with existing regulatory frameworks and standards. So often universities mightn't have their own policies that relate to some of this, but there are bigger things that their government might have signed up to, or in some cases more discipline-specific things that a department or a faculty within their organisation may be being bound by. Things like the FAIR principles, so that they can be looked to for inspiration as well. And finally, the outer layer is that policy is not enough. You also need mechanisms that help implement policy, such as infrastructure, training opportunities. It's not a great idea to introduce a policy unless your staff are trained already to know how to do something, and support roles, reproducibility guidelines, etc. And so that document just also makes some broader suggestions on how to affect that kind of change in an institution, that being able to demonstrate the volume of research software that a research organisation generates is quite useful. We've only seen in the last 10 to 15 years this idea that research data is an asset that universities should value and leverage. Research software is similarly an asset that they should be utilising. So any way to demonstrate that is incredibly valuable. It's quite hard to do. Some of the new initiatives like open source program offices are encouraging doing that through an institutional GitHub organisational instance. It's also helpful to develop generally more recognition of the important role that research software plays. That can be things like supporting research software engineering communities, or the staff or the people with those skills at an organisation, which can be people with job titles like research software engineer, but there can also be about 200 other job titles like bioinformatician, librarian, research data officer, researcher, postgraduate, professor. Many different job titles will be doing some element of research software development or maintenance in their role. And finally, as I talked about before in talking about one of the earlier reports, it's just important to engage more broadly with key institutional stakeholders and decide any kind of change that you're trying to achieve in a kind of a broader change strategy than just changing the policy. All right, and now I'll pass over to Dan Katz. Sure. We'll take a question, please.
Thank you so much for
I don't know if it's on, maybe.
Yeah, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I have one question with you, and also I have one question with you. So my first question is that, is there any kind of data protection policy that your software has to comply? Because as far my understanding, there are also EU rules that have been applied, and mostly they are data protection by EU. So you have to meet, and this research organization and research science and data sharing that people are presenting, their focus area is whole globe. It's not only specific to EU. So how do you compliance these region-wise regulations? How do you come up with the common solution? And second question is that, like, for example, if some government or for official purpose, they needed this kind of data, will it be shared? Or like, do you think it's, I mean, I don't know how to kind of ask this question in a particular way, but that thought popped up in my mind about data protection.
Okay, we'll let Dan Katz answer that one.
Sorry, so the reason I was interested in answering this is because I don't want to answer this. And it's basically that what you're asking isn't really related to what we're saying here. So we're saying policies to promote the development of software. What the software does is not a subject of the policy. So if an institution has a policy that says something about data protection, that's separate than this. If it doesn't have such a policy, it's still separate than this.
Okay.
Right, so it's just orthogonal to this discussion.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. One more question? Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Johan Philips, University of Leuven. So we don't have a research software policy, but we do have in different other policies, like the research assessment policy or the open science or RDM policy, we have references to software is also like you do open data sharing. So my question is, how important do you think it's that an institution should have their own research software policy compared to because we also have the support, like if you look at the layers, we also have the support of the fair software trainings. We have a GitLab repository, etc. And so we give trainings to the researchers, but we don't refer them to our institutional research software policy. So should we, or is this equally okay like that?
This is a wonderful question because one of the reasons I also joined the group was because of we saw in the research data and software community in Maastricht University in the Netherlands the need of such policy, right? But what I've gathered in the last 2 years working with research software policies is that at least for my institution, we don't need one, right? So it is counterintuitive, in fact. Like I'm part of the group promoting research software policy documents, but the conclusion, at least for my institution, is that we don't need one document to rule them all, but different institutions, as Carlos mentioned, different policy model frameworks can work. What's important is the circles, right? So, for instance, what I would try to promote in my university is to identify those different policy frameworks. There is an existing framework on valorization and knowledge transfer, one existing policy framework on open science, and one existing framework on research data management. What I want to promote is to reform those three so that research software is recognized in those three, right? So that in the valorization and commercialization framework, right now, research software is not mentioned, so we need to be mentioned, right? In the research data management one, just recently got reformed, so that research software is a recognizable research output. And in the open science one, we need to do the same. Now, accounting for the different, provisions of those policies, that we can say those provisions, the collection of those provisions, those are the research software policy frameworks of my institution, right? So, and as long as you have the overview of those and you have covered those layers, we can say that research software is promoted and protected in your university, and perhaps in the future that will come into one document, but it's not necessarily the case.
And maybe if I can have one follow-up question, then, because I don't think that our policymakers, so like the top-level K-level policy team, realizes the importance of research software as we do. We see the different links in the open science policy, RDM policy, and research assessment policy, because we have introduced them there gradually or as a small note. Sometimes it's a small note, sometimes it's actually in the biosketch. If people want to send in their file for promotion, they can, instead of just sending publication lists, they can also add additional research activities or additional research achievements, and software is one of the examples. But I was thinking, yeah, if we can, looking at your model where you have the layers, if we can at some way frame it also to our own policymakers, that it will become more important in their head as well. So that's why I asked the first question: should we go for a software policy or try to influence the existing ones?
Yeah, that really would depend on your organization, right? So and there, what we discovered in the case studies is that you need to identify the key actors, right? So who are some stakeholders in the organization? Sometimes are high level, sometimes are senior faculty members that can steer these efforts. What we saw also in the implementation of those case studies and some actual policies that mentioned how the working groups were formed, it's mentioned in the actual documents, you form task forces, right? So you form a working group in your organization and you see how to steer that. What's funnily enough is that when there is in the organization some senior policymaker that has background, more technical background, gets easier, right? Because they understand exactly that you mentioned. We understand the value, yeah, because we've done a little of these things, right? But if you can identify those actors, those are going to be your best friends.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead then to have a bit of a discussion. I'm going to leave this up here for a minute. If you have a phone and want to scan the QR code to get to the poll, or if you want to type in one of these very complicated things, please do. I know as far as I can tell, the video that's being broadcast is maybe 20 or 30 seconds delayed from where we are here. And so to try to get the poll to work right, I'm going to kind of keep talking for a few seconds and then see if people there will join in. But I'm not really sure that I have anything else that I can say. So let's try this and see if I can handle a Windows computer. Oh, sorry, but and I also will say just before we do this that there's questions in the poll that are asking about names of people in some cases or roles within your university. If you don't want to answer one of those in the poll, then you can do this in the notes document, or you can just send an email to any of us. We're trying to use this in part to understand some issues, but also in part to try to understand how we move some of these things forward. And so, so some connections that will help us is one of the things that we're looking for. Okay, let's see. Okay, that didn't do anything. Okay. Okay. Okay, so first we're just trying to get a sense of different kinds of organizations that people represent. And we see mostly academic or government with a few other things. If the person that said other is in the room and they wanted to say what other was, that might be interesting. But it also could be, yes? Okay, all right, thank you. Let's see, let's try to go on. Okay, so hopefully you have another question now on the poll? Yes, okay, at least somebody does. So yeah, so we just wanted to see what policies the organization has that includes research software. And if this is something that you know or not. And we'll just wait a couple of seconds. We had more people that answered the first question. I hope people can answer this one as well. Okay, so about half of the folks here do know what policies there are. Some don't, and some answer that it's complicated. And I guess I'm trying to remember why I put that down as a possible answer. I don't know. Does anybody that said it's complicated want to say briefly what that means to them? Yeah.
Because my institution doesn't have a policy, but I'm a person who promote research software policy for other organizations. So.
Okay. Okay. Let's go on to the next question, and this is. Obviously, assuming that you know something about your organization's policies, do you know what gaps there are related to research software? And if it isn't becoming clear, we're hoping that because you came to the session that you're actually interested in what these policies are, and potentially you might be interested in actually working towards this, particularly if you know what the gaps are, you know what your organization's policy is. Okay, I will keep going. Almost everybody knows what the gaps are, which is good. So the next question then is there a person or a role at your institution who should be aware of this work, the PRO4RS work, and can act on it in order to help develop better or any policies? Okay, and again, this is, I think, fairly promising, right? Because now we know what gaps there are, we know where the policy is, we know who can act on the policy. And so if you said yes in the previous question, we're just interested in knowing if this is based on the person, like the particular instance of the person themselves, or their role. Right? It could be that the person is has a research software background and that's the reason they're right, or it could be that they're the vice president for open science and that's the reason they're right, and it doesn't matter who the person is. And the NA, not applicable, is there in case you said no on the previous one and feel like you wanted to answer this question anyhow. Okay, so primarily based on the role, not the person, which is... It could be both, yeah. Sorry, I guess I should have put both, sorry. I think if it's, in some ways, if it's based on the role, that has some positive aspects because, right, that person will see it as part of their job. If it's based on the person, it may be just somebody that's interested but doesn't necessarily see it as part of their job. But they might actually be more motivated because of their own. Again, just interesting for us to collect. And so then if there is such a person, what do you think would motivate them to act? And again, we're kind of thinking about how do we move forward, and actually again hoping then that you think about how to move forward, because if you can think of some motivation, then maybe that will would encourage you to talk to that person or would help us reach out to that person. All right, so strategic priorities of the organization makes a lot of sense. Yeah, others have already done it, or competition in some ways. Kind of competition between peers is always a common activity. We need to make it a problem for them to solve. Yep, funder requirements. Shortcomings in support to researchers. Okay, current national legislation does not match practice. Yeah, okay, that's always an interesting one with software. Fair requirements. I guess fair requirements, yeah, I guess it would be a question about where fair requirements are coming from, if that's actually a funder requirement or a government requirement or an institutional requirement or something else. Request from internal developers about sharing makes sense, easy to implement. Well, I'm not completely sure about that, but maybe it's if it's easy to implement, that would motivate them to act, which that makes sense. Rules spelled out in policy. Okay, so it's their job, which makes sense. I will say that one of the things that I think sometimes is that every person, well, maybe not every person, but a lot of people are thinking about what their next role is going to be, and they're looking for something that they can say was the big accomplishment in their role, and maybe this could be part of that, which maybe is visibility and recognition. So thank you for whoever just typed that. Ensuring credit citation, yeah. The practices. Okay, thank you. All right, I'll wait another couple of seconds to see if anybody else is typing anything. I see a few people typing, but I don't know what they're typing, so. Okay, we'll go on. All right, thank you for that. Okay, and then are you actually motivated to try to make changes at your institution, whether that's you directly or you working towards somebody else or working through somebody else? I don't see any no's, which is nice.
Emphasis on try.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
Do we succeed?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. You never know what's going to happen, but trying is the beginning. And I will say that sub-working group 2 report was intended to kind of collect ideas about how to try and how to approach this. So, okay, going on. So then a question about the fact that we do have those materials about how to actually do this, and we had a bunch of people on the previous poll question that said that they were interested. So would it be helpful if we had a group of people who could talk together about this, right? I've tried this and it worked at my institution, or I tried this and it didn't work, but what should I try next, or something like that. I would hope that everybody that said, okay, I was hoping that everybody that said yes on the previous one would have some answer to this one. So for people that said no, does anybody want to say why not? Does it just seem like this wouldn't be helpful? It wouldn't be a good use of time? There's a better way to do this, or something else? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Emmanuel Soding from Helmholtz Association, Germany. I think they're just simply better people than myself that are suited to do that. I'm not a software developer at all, okay. But I know they have the problems, and there are people in our institution that can do that much better than I can.
Okay. And then for people that said it's complicated, does anybody want to say anything about that? Yeah.
So yeah, Johan Philips again from the University of Leuven. I really would like to, but I said it's complicated because we just spent a year and a half on renewing our data policy, and then trying to get people motivated again within this and 6 months or so. I don't know what if there's would be a time frame. Seems complicated to me. That's a bit the context. So I would love to, but the timing is a bit difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyone else? Do you mind coming up and, yeah?
So Susanne Den Boer from the University of Copenhagen. I'm also the one that wrote that about legislation, because in our current data management policy, we have some old copyright legislation in Denmark that says that all software belongs to the employer. So that's actually in our data policy right now. And that, of course, does not correspond to current practice, where most researchers put their code in GitHub without checking with their employer. So that's, yeah, there are some hurdles to be discussed first, and there needs to be a mandate for this work to be initiated before such an initiative would be useful, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Are we getting anything else on the Q&A related to any of this? No. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is one of the again, one of the questions where we're hoping that you might be able to suggest other people that we could work with. Sorry, there should be an S. There should be across institutions. Typo on my part. If you want to suggest anybody publicly, please do. If you want to suggest anybody in the notes, that's fine as well. And if you want to email any of us with any suggestions, that would be fine as well. But again, we're a group of 8 people, I think Michelle said. And we're basically just wrapping up this working group. And so we're interested in how could we continue some of this activity. Now that we've made this progress, what's the next step? I'll just let this sit here for a second in case anybody wants to do anything. Okay, yes, funders is good. It's a hard group to think of who the right person is, but I was kind of hoping for names of people. Okay, well, I'm going to go on, but again, please feel free to reach out to us however you would like and make suggestions if you have any. Okay, that's a bad sign. So STM associations, I guess I think of STM in terms of publishing. Is that what was meant by that? Science and technology medicine, maybe? Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, okay. And sorry, did you type that one? Yeah. Yeah, okay. And were you thinking about publishing, or did you think of something more broad? Can you? Yeah, thanks.
I'm Katz from Japan. I'm a staff at the National Institute of Science and Technology Policies for helping develop open science and open access policy. But I was once a publisher at the Chemical Society of Japan. And STM Association is a worldwide largest publishers association. And if you wish to connect to the reward and the reputational evaluated system to system between research software and publishing, then the STM Association will be a will play a great role as an intermediate stakeholders. But as we see, we are, how can I say that, we are thinking about beyond the journal articles. So it's a kind of intermediate or temporary activities, we should say, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, so now we're definitely in publishing at this point, which is good. Yeah, we have, well, okay, yeah. All right, and then if you did suggest a class of people, or you're thinking of a specific person that maybe you're going to tell us about later, what would motivate them to help work on this? I mean, if I think about STM, I could think about the chorus group, or there's I think there is an STM group, another STM association. Yeah, so why would somebody there want to add something else to their busy schedule? What is their motivation for helping research software policies move forward? Does that help them? Does it help the association? Does it help the publishing community? Does it help the funder community in some way? If it's a person, how does it help them? All right, I don't know if anybody's putting anything in the notes document either. Okay. All right, thank you. Maybe I can ask, this is actually just kind of going on the second question about promotion and review committees. I guess I have kind of mixed feelings about potentially how to make changes in promotion and review committees, where on one side I see things like, I don't know, like DORA or other kind of research assessment policy activities, which are trying to make some changes. And then on the other side, I see disciplinary communities that are making changes often for different reasons. Is there one or the other that makes more sense or seems more effective or more likely to be successful in this? Has anybody worked with any of these groups to try to make any changes? Okay. Okay, yeah, ethical and legal problems and metrics of impact. Yep, okay, so these make sense. All right, I think we're getting to the end. Yeah, okay, so so what did we forget to talk about? So we asked a bunch of questions here, and these were kind of a chain of thinking that we had talked about ahead of time and wanted to get towards where we thought we would be able to potentially move forward. But maybe we didn't ask the right questions. And if not, what should we have asked, or what do you think we've missed? And I'll just leave this for a second as well. So somebody commented about commercialization versus open science. Would they be willing to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's me, and I'm
Okay.
just typing another one as well that is related.
Okay.
And that's it's Susanna from Copenhagen University again. That's connected to what I said with our current legislation, where that literally just says all software belongs to the university. And of course, my university, my organization, if I speak on behalf of the university, they have, of course, an interest to commercialize some of the software, right? So they may actually have other interests at play that the researchers may not have. So for me, actually, the whole issue with the policies, how do we navigate between that? And I hope maybe you have some experience from your use cases. The interests are not necessarily aligned within the organization. So how do we navigate that, and how do we land in a policy where all parties are happy, right? How do we tackle that issue? I think that's something that we are most worried about and have no solution for yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Right, okay, so we have institutions that see research software as part of a process, but not an asset or an outcome. We have issues about where the policy is made, whether it's at the institute itself or at something at a higher level. Is the interest of the organization aligned with the interest of the researcher, which is always a good question. Is a policy really the right tool? Would the person who said that want to say what they think the right tool might be if it's not a policy, and maybe a little more about that?
Well, it may be a little bit semantic, but some institutions are a little bit allergic against policies because policies are typically legal instruments. At least in Germany, we see them as a legal binding demand from the management or from the organization itself, whoever. And they more operate like with guidelines or recommendations or stuff like that. So my experience is that if you come up and you want to implement a policy, they say, no way, we won't do that, or the lawyers come and it drags forever. While if you're going to do with softer stuff, it'll more easily flow. And in the end, I assume who we want to address are the developers, who are, again, also not very well receptive to policies. They're more, for cooperation, yes, for everything else, I have my doubts. But so that was the background.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's funny, as you were saying that, I was thinking that the way we described policy wasn't quite as formal as that, but now I'm not actually sure, and maybe it is. Yeah, please.
Can I react? That's interesting because I think it's maybe a German language thing because I was just looking at one of the use cases from the German organizations. The title, when they translated to English, they translated it as guidelines, because then I think that then they were not legally binding, but they're encouraging researchers to do certain behaviors, but they're in German, they told me the words, but sorry, my German is 9. And then there was a difference between these are guidelines, because then they're easier to get buy-in from the researchers. But for the scope of the work that we were doing, it's like, well, it's something that the organization says, you should be doing this. We consider that to be a policy, but yeah, they're I guess in German, they're not a policy, they are a guideline.
Okay, and then we have, why isn't research software a first-class citizen? We definitely are working on that, but the question about why is a hard one. And infrastructures that incorporate research software best practice. Okay, so thank you for those. I don't think we have any other questions now. So again, thank you, and let me see if I can get back to.
We just had a few final slides, and then we can have a little bit more discussion in the time we've got left. Just to share some information on some other events, workshops that we have happening. And just to explain some broader background that my organisation, the Research Software Alliance, which Dan's also involved in, does a lot of the broader international work that some of you have been flagging in the Mentee Needs doing. So we try and convene conversations across the research software funders, across the publishers, across the infrastructures like repositories and registries, conversations across national policy makers, and with international policy instruments like OECD's recommendation on public access to research data. That's not the right title, but it's something like that. And UNESCO's Open Science recommendations. So we have an event this Friday here in Brisbane. That's a co-located event. It's in the RDA website and go to co-located events, all the information there that's aimed at people who are funders and policymakers. To come and have this kind of conversation about why research software is important and what policies exist at international and national level, more so than institutional, simply because to run a workshop for all the people who are institutional policymakers, we thought might scope out a bit. But you can still register for that if it's of interest. It's just Friday morning. We also just wanted to flag that next year we're running a new event called the International Research Software Conference, where we'll be bringing together all the different stakeholders from the research software community, and we aim at kind of the leaders and decision makers and champions and influencers, and that can be people who have a job title like director of or senior something, but it can also be a PhD student who's leading a grassroots initiative or championing some kind of change in their local environment. So you can sign up now on an email list to get updates on that event as we share more information. And it is co-located with the UK-led Research Software Engineering Conference, ReSA, which happens every year in UK. So it's a nice chance to do two in 1 week. And finally, just since we're in this part of the world, I just wanted to flag another event in this part of the world in June next year. The Force 11 organisation are having their Force 2026 conference, their annual event, which is aimed at, I should just read what they've written, to shape the future of scholarly communications, aimed at researchers, publishers, librarians, technologists, funders, and policymakers, dedicated to advancing open scholarship. Yeah, so I just wanted to flag that, yes, we do try and enable some of the other conversations that you've said are needed across funders and publishers, etc. So that's the end of our set agenda, but we're aware we had a little time left, so we wondered if it would be useful to just open the floor to a bit broader brainstorm on if there are any really useful next steps that we could take as a community. As Dan said, we've officially wrapped up now this working group. If you're new to RDA, they have this fantastic setup for working groups where you write a case statement at the end which outlines what you're going to do for the next 18 months, and the community agree that that's a useful contribution. And so we've now done what we said we'd do and are finishing. But there's always opportunities for more work. I think we really just started to scratch the surface on this discussion. It's obviously at a very early phase, but we have a few minutes left if people want to share any thoughts on things they'd love to be involved in or love to see happen. Ideally there could be something like a support group for people who were trying to do this in their institutions and wanted to at least help each other, or perhaps interact with other people who've done it before, like some of the case studies, or us with some of our expertise having analysed this, but also open to other ideas. Which one?
Sorry, and I'm assuming that everybody is here because they have at least some interest in research software, but just to point out that this event, actually, the workshop on Friday morning will be hybrid. And so if there are people in your organization that you feel like maybe don't understand research software or its importance, and you'd like them to attend, and they're able to in this time zone, this 9 to noon here. I think we would welcome that. It's not something that, sorry, if you're from RDA, please close your ears for a second. It's not something that will require RDA registration for. You can just come along. Okay, and then following up on Michelle, if anybody does have any other ideas of things that we should be doing, should be working on, or could be doing collectively, then please feel free to come up and say so. And if not, maybe we'll end about 15 minutes early. Okay, well, thank you. We'll, I think the 4 of us will be around for a little bit, and then I guess immediately after this, I think we have the poster reception, so you'll probably find us there as well. So please, again, feel free to come up and chat with us. Thank you.